Hello everyone, welcome to this session. Today I am going to deliver a lecture on integrated planning of FSM system. I am Parwez Akhtar, Assistant Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, Manipal University. I have my expertise on computational river mechanics and environmental hydraulics. The broad objective of this session is to understand the importance of an integrated approach for fecal sludge management, to learn how to plan a fecal sludge management project on a city level, including a logical framework of the necessary activities, to understand how to select context appropriate options and to determine the critical selection factor in each specific context, and to be able to link the different aspects developed in the book, which has been given to you in the module, that is management, finance, stakeholder interest, technology, local environment, and understand how they are connected and influence each other. The process leaders often face a complicated situation characterized by diverse levels of service and a patchwork of uncoordinated and independent stakeholders managing various activities while designing an FSM system. Hence, FSM planning aims to transform such a complex situation into a well-organized and coordinated management framework. FSM planning is about understanding and matching stakeholders' interests, needs, and constraints with an appropriate and accepted management scheme and financial mechanism. Such understanding can only be acquired through a thorough assessment of the initial situation dealt in detail in the previous session. In this session, an integrated approach in order to facilitate planners, engineers, and process leaders in a city to bind together different activities to achieve the objective of FSM system in a more structured and logical way. In the next slide, we'll discuss FSM planning from A to Z with activities and participation of stakeholders. Before that, we'll outline integrated planning activities with outcomes and is presented in this slide. The different phases are study exploratory, preliminary feasibility studies, feasibility study, detailed project development, implementation, and monitoring for sustainability. The outcomes are for study exploratory inception report, preliminary feasibility studies, then you will get preliminary studies report, feasibility study phase will bring feasibility study report, detailed project development phase will land up with detailed project document, and then comes implementation, and then finally come monitoring for sustainability. Coming to the FSM planning from A to Z, it is presented here. The activities and the outcomes. In this slide, the detail has been given for A to G. The first one activities from the exploratory studies is preliminary assessment of the initial situation and first inventory of the stakeholder. The corresponding outcome will be overview of the situation, facilitator are identified. Second, B is identification and preliminary characterization of stakeholders and their relationship. Then outcome will be all stakeholders are identified and characterized. Third one is initial launching workshops including field visit with all the stakeholders. Corresponding outcome will be the stakeholders are sensitized to sanitation reality and aware about the project's objective. Third one is assessment of sanitation practices and needs, institutional setup, legal and regulatory framework, existing organizational mode, city structure and heterogeneity of the sanitation practices, existing financial flows, and climate. These are the activities which has to be considered after the initial launching workshop including field visit with all the stakeholders. The corresponding outcome will be sanitation practices are identified as well as urban heterogeneity, strength, weaknesses, opportunities and threats are identified, that is SWOT analysis. The enabling environment is described. After that, the activity comes is selection of potential organizational mode. Corresponding outcome will be there, orientation of the process towards realistic option. After that, the activity will be identification of sites for treatment. Corresponding outcome will be stakeholders have indicated existing and potential sites. Then comes characterization and selection of key stakeholders. Outcome will be stakeholders who have interest in and or influence on the process are identified. This way, two phases has been dealt: exploratory study and preliminary, that means pre-feasibility studies. After that, we'll move to next slide, in which we'll discuss feasibility study. In this, different activities are mentioned here. The H, quantification and characterization of sludge. The outcome will be process leader know what has to be treated. Then comes characterization and selection of sites. Corresponding outcome will be appropriate sites are selected. Then comes J, pre-selection of combination of technologies, organizational modes and financial mechanism. Corresponding outcome will be scenarios are elaborated. After that, the activity will be detailed evaluation of selected options, including requirement of technology combinations, pros and cons, O&M, organizational modes and institutional setup, roles and responsibility, contractual arrangement, capital and operational costs, financial mechanism, estimated budget, skill required to run each system, environmental impact assessment. The corresponding outcome will be that system scenarios are evaluated and optimized. Then comes the activity preliminary presentation of the results to the key stakeholders. It will give you the outcome. Stakeholders are consulted and agreement is secured. Then comes final selection of system options. Then comes workshop, validation of chosen option by all the stakeholders. Proposals are validated by all stakeholders. Then finally, within the phase of feasibility study, reassessment of key stakeholder according to the validated options activity has to be taken into consideration. The corresponding outcome will be the influence and interest of stakeholders are reassessed according to the previous decisions. Coming to the next slide, the activities with regard to three last phases like detailed project development and implementation and MGE, that is monitoring and evaluation, comes into consideration. In this detailed project development phase, the first activity is detailed project development design of the treatment plant, detailed definition of roles and responsibilities, O&M management plan with clear allocation of cost, responsibilities and training needs, convention between stakeholders, securing financial and institutional mechanism, strategy for control and enforcement, definition of needs for capacity building and job creation, definition of contracts and bidding process, monitoring strategy for the implementation phase, timeline for implementation with distinct phases, and itemized implementation budget. The whole will have the outcome. The action plan is written. The whole system is described in detail. Second one is workshop, that is presentation of the action plan. The action plan is validated by all stakeholders, is one of the essential outcome and essential activities, also important activities. Reassessment of key stakeholders according to action plan. The corresponding outcomes are roles and responsibility of stakeholders are redefined according to the action plan. Coming to the implementation part, the first activity will be the requirement of contractors for building an O&M. The second one is organization of the sectors, transfer of roles and responsibilities, capacity building, information campaigns. The fourth one is monitoring of construction. After that comes reassessment of key stakeholders before inauguration of this FSTP. Then comes startup of the system. Then comes official inauguration ceremony. The outcome of the implementation part will be FS management is transferred to the corresponding stakeholder. Awareness is raised among users. Capacity is built where needed. Building according to the state of the art is ensured. Capacity of the stakeholders to deal with their new roles and responsibilities assessed. The FSTP is brought to its state of equilibrium. Stakeholders have acquired the necessary skills. Finally comes the monitoring part. In this, the activity is monitoring of the running system, technical stability, satisfaction of stakeholders, and cost recovery. These are kept in view. The outcome will be that the system is monitored to ensure its sustainability. Coming to the question, why integrated approach is needed? The common reason for failure are the implementation of infrastructures without consulting the main stakeholders or without planning adequate operation and maintenance and financial scheme. Besides lack of institutionalization of the system, lack of skills, insufficient organizational capacity, and lack of cost recovery mechanism are also recognized as major factors in failure. Broadly speaking, it is possible to say that the enabling environment necessary for a functioning FSM system was either not there in the first place or was not developed as an integral part of the project. Hence, a careful assessment of the initial situation and involvement of the stakeholder will ensure a more appropriate selection of technical options and also provide insight into the presence of the fundamental conditions necessary for an enabling environment. In the next slide, we'll see the factors which assist to achieve enabling environment. The component of an enabling environment, we can see the socio-cultural acceptance, financial arrangement, skill and capacity, institutional arrangement, legal and regulatory framework, government support. These all will be favorable. In that case, it will land up with enabling environment that will create an integrated approach to the FSM system. In order to find out the most appropriate and cost-effective system, all stakeholders should be involved and competencies should be sought. For example, the current impeding service providers, even if they don't have legal status, will be the most knowledgeable people regarding the collection of FS. Sometimes it may be difficult for utilities or government agencies to give up or to delegate some of their power and responsibilities. However, it is the price to pay for a cost-effective service with broad coverage. It is important that FSM be government or utility driven, but inclusion of other stakeholders is usually necessary to fill in the gaps of state service provisions. Private-public partnership PPPs are synergies that need to be investigated. For an integrated and participatory approach is upright, it must be embedded in initial project design. In the next slide, we'll see how participatory approach is to be embedded in different phases of integrated planning. Project phases and participatory process stages. Within different phases like exploratory studies, first contact with the field, main objective to identify FSM stakeholders, get an overview of the situation and identify facilitators. Next phase, preliminary studies. The preliminary studies consist of a detailed assessment of the local context. Then comes feasibility study. The feasibility study consists of an in-depth analysis of the situation leading to system scenarios. At the end of the feasibility study, the results are discussed with the different stakeholders and formally validated. In the phase of detailed project development, this phase aims to define in practice the modalities of implementation of the validated scenario. It ends with a workshop that presents and validated these modalities. Implementation. This is the implementation phase, ending up with the official delivery of a working system. And in the monitoring for sustainability, the system is monitored to ensure its sustainability with the cooperation of stakeholders and local end users. In the next slide, we'll discuss different phases in detail. The first one is exploratory and preliminary studies. Preliminary studies should start with the identification and preliminary characterization of the stakeholders and the relationship between them. Once all stakeholders are sensitized to the sanitation reality and aware of the project objective, it will be much easier to collect information for the preliminary and feasibility studies. It is often not easy to access data, especially where information is power, and it is important to make key contacts and build trust through transparency. The assessment should be based upon a participatory process using semi-structured interviews, focus group meeting, or household survey. Because each stakeholder has a specific experience and knowledge of the situation, they also have particular interests and needs that must be taken into consideration. At the end of this phase, the process leaders should have a clear idea of feasible options and key stakeholder. Second phase comes the feasibility study. The main result of the feasibility study is the identification of viable system options. This phase starts with the quantification and characterization of sludge as a prerequisite for the selection and design of technical option. Based on this and the information collected during the preliminary studies, technical, organizational, and financial options can be pre-selected and studied in depth and discussed in a participatory manner. It is critical to recognize that FSM planning is about the combination of services, not about single technologies. Each aspect influences and is influenced by the others. Each scenario should be evaluated in requirement of technological combinations, pros and cons, management and institutional setup, roles and responsibilities, contractual arrangements, capital and operation cost, financial mechanism, estimated budget, capacity building and training needs, and environment impact assessment, often legally required. It is important to involve the key stakeholders in the evaluation, as they will have to take over the roles and responsibility of the system. It is also important that stakeholders are properly informed. The agreement reached by the stakeholders should be based on an understanding of the management and financial implications of the selected systems. At the end of the phase, it is recommended to organize a validation workshop with all the key stakeholders in order to publicly and officially present and validate the decision taken. Any disagreement from the important and or influential stakeholders should be cleared before the public workshop. Third one, and the most important phase, comes the detailed project development action planning. Based on the option validated in the previous phase, a detailed project document or action plan can be developed. This document should include the following items. The first one is detailed design of the treatment plan, detailed definition of roles and responsibilities in the new system and the term of references, O&M management plan with a clear allocation of costs, responsibilities and training needs, agreement between stakeholders, securing financial and institutional mechanism, strategies for control and enforcement, including the frequency of control, means needed and sanctions, definition of needs for capacity building and job creation, definition of contracts and bidding process, monitoring and evaluation strategy for the implementation phase, and finally, timeline for implementation with distinct phases and an itemized implementation budget. The detailed project document and action plan should be presented, discussed, and validated in a workshop with all the key stakeholders. Several workshops may be needed until a consensus is reached, and that is very important. Then the implementation phase comes. This phase is mainly about translating the action plan into work packages that will ultimately become contracts for implementing the FSM system. Several arrangements are applicable for the implementation of the plans, the most common being through private sector contractors based on competitive tendering and bidding procedure. After the finalization of the construction works, the whole system, that is infrastructure and stakeholders, required a startup phase for acclimatization. For the FSTPs, the startup period will last until the system reaches its state of equilibrium and expected performance. For example, with planted drawing beds, the acclimatization of plant is a delicate operation that should not be neglected. As for the stakeholders, they will need some time to get used to their new roles and responsibilities, and some adjustment will certainly be needed in the first few months. Support from the project team is essential at the beginning of the operational phase. And finally, an inauguration ceremony can be organized. Such an event can generate public interest and increase awareness and can have a positive influence on institutional decision makers. And finally comes the phase monitoring and evaluation. Any FSM system should be monitored and evaluated. Many development projects have failed because there was no follow-up after commissioning of the FSTP. The stability of the FSTP treatment units, the satisfaction of stakeholders, the functioning of the organizational scheme, the cost recovery level, and the sustainability of financial mechanism should be monitored. Adjustment will probably still have to be made after commissioning. Monitoring throughout the whole year is necessary, especially for FSTPs. The assessment of available capacity and gaps is crucial. Ultimately, the success of the FSM plan largely depends on the capacity of the stakeholders to enforce the financial mechanism that have been planned, allowing cost recovery for the FSTP, and the capacity of the stakeholders to operate and maintain the FSTP itself. Only an integrated approach can guarantee that in the end, these capacities are still present. Thank you.